Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 35 minutes, we'll have discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, dated 1st of September 2020. We'll pick up the articles which are important for the civil service examination and understand and develop conceptual understanding for them. The articles that we will take up for discussion has been tabulated on the screen and the timestamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is a very important news on page number 1. GDP falls 23.9% in the first quarter. See, National Statistical Office (NSO) under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation estimates the GDP data for India. And since 1996, we have been measuring GDP on a quarterly basis. And this is the first instance ever since that the quarterly GDP has seen negative growth. Even at the time of 2008 financial crisis, there was huge dip in the GDP growth, but it did not go negative. The last time we saw negative GDP growth was in 1979. But even that was nowhere close to the scale of GDP contraction that has happened presently. Not only that, the scale of GDP contraction that has happened in India is the highest in the world. We are looking at GDP contraction of around 24%. For UK it is around 20%, Malaysia 17%, Eurozone 15%, US around 9%, Russia 8.5% and Brazil 0.3%. For China, actually there has been GDP growth by 3.2%. This is the worst economic time of India after independence and we are staring at recession. Recession is said to happen when the overall economic activity for 2 consecutive quarters, meaning over the period of 6 months, is accompanied by decline in income, sales and employment, mostly measured by GDP growth. In simpler terms, if the GDP growth is negative for 2 consecutive quarters, it is said to be economic recession. We have hugely negative growth in the first quarter of 2020-21. Even in the second quarter, if we recover, it is highly likely that the GDP growth numbers will still be negative. So in all probability, we are looking at economic recession presently. After independence, for the first time, the negative growth rate was in 1957-58. That was on account of balance of payment crisis. Then due to severe drought in 1965-66, we again saw negative growth. Then due to energy crisis of 1972-73, we had negative growth. And then the oil shock and balance of payment crisis of 1979-80, we saw negative growth of minus 5.2%. But these numbers are so dwarf compared to the present GDP growth number of around minus 24%. The 2 major drivers of India's GDP, consumption expenditure and investment, both have gone down. The only saving grace was the increase in government's expenditure. Government's expenditure has increased to provide stimulus to the economy. Barring Indian agriculture, all the sector has seen negative growth in this quarter. The highest is in the construction sector of minus 50%. Agriculture has seen the positive growth of 3.4%. Because of the pandemic and lockdown, construction workers were migrating back to the rural region and this gave advantage to the agriculture sector in terms of easy availability of labor. Also because of many initiatives by government, the supply of fertilizers, seeds and other inputs were ensured to the agriculture sector. Other inputs like electricity was also uninterrupted. There were problems in taking the agricultural product to the mandis, but as the lockdown was eased, that was made possible. But note this fact that construction sector has been worst affected. We'll come back to this in a while. See, COVID-19 and the consequential lockdown has disrupted both the supply side and the demand side of the economy. But you also must be aware that economy started to slow down even before the eruption of COVID-19 pandemic. There is a data point on page number 9 showing that economy started to decelerate long before the eruption of COVID-19 pandemic. This is supported by the data of industrial activity. If we measure the output of 8 core sector, as is done in the Index of Industrial Production, we saw that there was negative growth of the industrial output in the month of October 2019. This is supported by the negative electricity demand data as well. And this is supported by the data of negative GST collection in the subsequent month of the year 2019. It is easy to understand how COVID-19 has caused the GDP to decelerate. But for understanding the complete picture, you have to understand this. Why GDP started to decrease from the period 2017-18. As has been highlighted in the Economic Survey of 2017-18, the driver of economic growth is investment. It is also consumption, but mostly it is investment. And once the economy gets its pace, then consumption also support to sustain that pace. When there is more investment in the economy, then there is more production. There is more job creation, there is more export, and all these things give rise to economic growth. When there is economic growth, then the wages of the labor increase. And with the increased wages and more disposable income, there is more consumption. When there is more consumption, then there is more motivation for production and hence investment. So a virtuous cycle like this gets into motion. Economic Survey 2017-18 has suggested to sustain the economy, we have to focus on this virtuous cycle. However, with increased investment, economic growth does not catch up immediately. Usually, the impact of increased or decreased investment on GDP takes some time, and this time period approximately is 4 years. This is technically called as the lagged effect of investment on GDP growth rate. Similarly, as the economic growth increases, consumption does not increase immediately. So there is lagged effect of economic growth on consumption as well. And this lagged period is around 2 to 3 years. What you have to know is that investment in India started to decrease around 2012-13. But as we have talked about, there is lagged effect of investment on GDP growth rate. So the economic growth did not decrease immediately. Economic growth of India continued to be high for next 3 to 4 years. Economic growth only started to decrease after 2016-17. And we have just talked about that there is a lagged effect of economic growth on consumption also. So as economic growth started to decelerate, it started to reduce, consumption did not decrease immediately. But consumption began to decrease 2 to 3 years after, that is 2019-20. And once consumption has also decreased, that will further decrease the investment and further decrease the economic growth. And this trend we started to observe towards the third quarter of 2019-20, around October of 2019. So this is the reason why economy started to decelerate in the third quarter of 2019-20. But the root cause of it and the crucial question to understand is this. Why investment started to decrease from 2012-13? The effect of which is felt in the economy even if you discount for the fact of COVID-19. See, investment in India is mostly led by household. Household investment is the major component of investment in India. In 2011-12, it was around 16%. In 2017-18, it dropped down to 10.5%. On the other hand, the private sector investment did not increase at all. It remained the same around 11%. So did the public sector investment around 7%. But overall, investment decreased from the period of 2011-12 to 2017-18. There are two things to understand here. Why household investment decreased and why private corporate sector investment became stagnant. To answer the first part of the question regarding household sector investment, you have to know the fact that around 2014, the housekeeping of banks was started by the RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan. And then it was known that the banks were in the state of complete shamble. There were hidden NPAs that the bank was not showing in the book. And once it came out, then the condition of the bank was known and the bank became reluctant to give more loans. The major investment of household sector is in the real estate. People buy land or they invest in housing, they buy flats or they build their own houses. Real estate is the major area of household sector investment. And household sector invest mostly by taking loans. When banks were not ready to give loans on account of NPA, then the household sector investment decreased. And the stagnation of private sector investment can be explained on account of twin balance sheet problem. The balance sheet problem of the corporate sector and the balance sheet problem of the banks or other lending agencies like NBFCs. Both these factors together caused the slowdown in investment in Indian economy, because of which Indian economy started finally to decelerate in the third quarter of 2019-20. Now I'll bring your attention back to this data point. We saw that construction sector is the worst affected. Construction sector has been affected in the lockdown, obviously because of the lockdown norms and migration of construction workers. But construction sector was also worst affected even before the eruption of COVID-19, and that was on account of decreased household investment. With this, we have completed the circle of understanding of growth and slowdown of Indian economy. This is the overall picture. This is where we are presently. But the million-dollar question is how to come out of this, how to bring the economy back on track. If you see, everything began with decrease in investment. And investment decreased because of rising NP of bank. To solve the problem, you have to get where the problem has arisen from. So to fix everything, we have to fix the banking sector and health of other lending institutions like NBFCs. There is a news on page number 1, PLA aggression blocked at Pangong Lake. News has come in yesterday that Chinese army has attempted to violate the status quo along LAC. They attempted to control areas along LAC along the southern bank of Pangong Lake. This is in violation of the consensus of maintaining status quo that was reached during the recent military and diplomatic talk. So it appears that Chinese were not interested in maintaining any status quo at all. The discussion that they engaged into was only to buy more time to develop more infrastructure and strategy to be deployed along LAC. The Chinese, on the other hand, has claimed that Indian armies crossed the line near the Rekhin mountain pass near Rizangla. In order to understand the entire picture, we'll have to look at the map. Let's try and locate Pangong Lake on Google Map. It's here somewhere. We can see this clearly now. It's a transnational brackish water lake. 1/3 of it is in India, 2/3 in China. As you can see, line of actual control cuts through this lake. Let's zoom a little and turn to satellite mode in order to understand the terrain along Pangong Lake better. As you can see on the north bank of Pangong Lake in the Indian side, there are ridges, and this region is well described as consisting of 8 fingers. The 8 fingers or the 8 ridges can be visualized like this, and you must observe that the line of actual control is on the right hand side of the 8th finger. But after the 1962 war, Chinese has been shifting their perception of LAC westward, and presently their perception of LAC goes roughly like this. So Chinese perception of LAC cuts through the finger 4, it cuts through the Pangong Lake like this, and you also must observe that it also cuts through the Chushul Valley. And the Rizangla Pass that we have mentioned earlier is here. So the Rizangla Pass and all the 8 fingers in the north bank of Pangong Lake are within the Indian territory. But the claim of Chinese that has been reported in the Chinese media is India has crossed the line along the Rizangla Pass region. But the Rizangla Pass region as such is not in the Chinese territory. But Chinese view this region as their territory because they have shifted their perception of LAC considerably westward of Rizangla Pass, right up till the Chushul Valley region. It is clear that Chinese have been trying to consolidate their position in the north bank and also in the south bank of Pangong Lake. See, Pangong Lake as such is a brackish water lake. It gets its water from the nearby glacier, but there is no way out for the water to flow, so it has turned salty. But not as salty as the seawater, but not fresh water either. So it's a brackish water lake. Hence, there is no rivalry over the water resource of Pangong Lake between India and China. But from the strategic point of view, Chinese can enter into the territory of India through the Pangong Lake very easily in the eventuality of war. And that is why Chinese have been trying to consolidate their position in the region. Military analysts also have suggested that this new aggression by the Chinese side and violation of the consensus to maintain status quo is a diversion tactics. They are doing this to divert attention of their full swing construction which is happening in the Deepsang Plain. Some 285 kilometers from the Pangong Lake, there is Deepsang Plain. Let us zoom out a little to see the location of Deepsang Plain. This is Deepsang Plain. Deepsang Plain has high strategic importance for India. It is the only plain in the region. It is the only region where tank maneuvering is possible, and tanks were used in the 1962 war in the region. So the strategic importance of this region is very high for India. This region is also very close by to LOC. Siachen Glacier is somewhere here. The distance between Siachen Glacier and Deepsang Plain is roughly around 70 kilometers. This is too close. Siachen Glacier has been the bone of contention between India and China. And in the eventuality of two-front war, Deepsang Plain will be very important for India. India has done many infrastructure development in the region. The Daulat Beg Oldie road that India has constructed recently crosses through the Deepsang Plain. So if the Deepsang Plain comes into the hands of Chinese, then these infrastructure facilities of India will be threatened, and that will also be a strategic loss to India in the eventuality of two-front war, dealing with both Chinese and Pakistanis close by. However, Indian troops have gathered in large number along LAC, and we hope that the status quo as it was in the month of May will soon be restored. There is another related article on page number 1. China controls 1000 square kilometers in Ladakh. According to the article, as per the recent intelligence input given to the government of India, Chinese have been controlling around 1000 square kilometers of land in the Indian territory. Although this information has not been put in public domain by government, but the newspaper claims to have got this information from highly placed military official. We have just seen that Chinese have been shifting their perceived LAC westward ever since the war of 1962 has happened. And they see strategic advantage in doing this. We have discussed that Pangong Lake can be used in the event of war. We have also seen that in the Chushul Valley, they have been intruding in the recent time. We have also seen that in strategic position like Deepsang Plain, they have constructing permanent structures. And we all know of their intrusion in the Galwan Valley. They are targeting the heights and the plains, both of which is very strategic in warfare. The region of Sky Chin has been illegally occupied by China, and this region has been given illegally by Pakistan to China. And China has been shifting its perceived LAC westward and along the strategic point like Deepsang Plain, Galwan Valley, Hot Spring region, Pangong Lake, and this region where there is Chushul Valley. They have been intruding and try to control more areas westward. According to the article, some 900 square kilometers of area is being controlled by Chinese. 20 square kilometers of area in the Galwan Valley, 12 square kilometers of area in the Hot Spring, 65 square kilometers in the Pangong Lake, and around 20 square kilometers in the Chushul Valley has been grabbed by Chinese in the recent time. The line of actual control is this, but Chinese have been consistently shifting it westward. And they are going westward along all the strategic points which are there along LAC. Obviously, this is an issue of great concern for India, but hopefully Indian Army will not only be able to stop the westward intrusion, but also be successful in restoring the status quo. This is a lead article from page number 8. GST reform needs a new grand bargain. In this lead article, the authors have discussed three things. First, they have tried to identify the flaw in the basic design of GST, which has led to revenue gap for the states. Then the authors have discussed why it is important for the center to take responsibility to give the GST revenue gap compensation to the states, and not to ask the states to fend for themselves or to manage their own financial affairs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the authors have given suggestions as to what structural reform is needed in the GST or what new grand bargain is required for GST to perform better and to fulfill the aim that was envisaged during formulation of GST, which were two. One, to meet the fiscal need of future, and other to strengthen the concept of our cooperative federalism. Both of which, according to the author, GST has failed to deliver. In the DNS dated 28th August, we have discussed that Finance Ministry has calculated that GST revenue gap for the year 2020-21 for the states would be rupees 3 lakh crore. And according to the previous year data of growth in GST revenue collection, it also has been estimated that rupees 65,000 crore will come from the GST compensation cess, which is levied on sin goods and luxury goods. So that leaves us with rupees 2.35 lakh crore, and from where this amount is going to come, we still do not know. Center also has classified this sum of rupees 2.35 lakh crore into two categories. One is rupees 97,000 lakh crore, which is on account of GST implementation. Meaning if GST implementation would have occurred under normal circumstances, if COVID-19 pandemic would not have erupted, then the states would have been short of their revenue collection on account of GST implementation by rupees 97,000 crore only. So the rest of rupees 1.3 lakh crore is on account of COVID-19 pandemic. This is huge sum of money, and center seems to be abdicating its responsibility, and it's asking the states to fend for itself, to manage their own finances for the coming few years. Sab log apna dekh lijiye. That is the kind of attitude that the center has adopted. The article has given out two reasons as to what was the problem in the basic structure of GST that has resulted in the revenue gap. Even if we discount for the fact that there is COVID-19 pandemic, still 97,000 crore revenue gap would have been there. So it also needs to be addressed as to what is the flaw in the GST design as to why this huge sum of money is coming up as revenue gap. As we all know that GST was envisaged as frictionless commerce across the state borders. The purpose was to make tax buoyant. Tax buoyancy refers to growth in the tax collection with respect to GDP growth. Tax is said to be buoyant if tax collection rate is higher than the GDP growth rate. And tax was supposed to be made buoyant by increasing tax compliance by making the system leak-proof, and by removing the inefficiencies in the tax administration by cascading of tax. So many of the taxes will go away, and in place one simple tax will come up. This will increase tax compliance, and this will also increase the overall tax collection because of removing the inefficiencies of cascading of tax. So it was thought that the tax collection overall will increase and everyone will benefit. The center, the state, and consumers will also benefit because the overall tax rate will decrease. However, it was also anticipated that in the initial years, because of the implementation process, the states will see decline in their revenue. So to bring the states on board, the center promised to reimburse the losses incurred by the states in the first 5 years. And for this purpose, GST compensation cess was formed, levied on the sin goods and luxury goods. Money coming into GST compensation cess was supposed to be used for compensating the states for decline in their revenue. So the promise was to reimburse the amount that will be short of 14% year-on-year growth of the tax in the first 5 years. It was estimated that the tax collection will increase by 14% year-on-year. And by whatever amount the tax collection by states is getting short of 14%, that amount will be reimbursed. If it is 10%, 4% will be reimbursed. If it is 11%, 3% will be reimbursed. With this agreement, the center and the states got into an agreement to launch goods and services tax. The states gave up the right to collect taxes like sale tax, and the center gave up the right to collect taxes like excise and service tax. And we came up with one good and simple tax, GST. Now, the author says that there were fundamental flaw in this design. First of all, 14% year-on-year growth is unprecedented. It has never been observed in the past, neither at national level nor any other major state has recorded this number of year-on-year growth of 14% in the last 5 years. So promising to fulfill the gap falling short of 14% was a generous mistake that the center did, in the opinion of the authors. Additionally, the authors are suggesting that there has been failure to learn from the experience of implementation of VAT, value added tax. VAT, in fact, was the first stage of reform in the indirect taxes, because VAT also involved harmonization of taxes across the nation, and it also required consensus from the states. And the system of VAT also had an inbuilt reimbursement formula. But there were two things. Number one, it was uniform throughout the nation, so there was no problem in implementation of VAT. And number two, the reimbursement formula was allowed to be tapered over the years. The promise to reimburse from the center to state was decreased gradually, unlike GST, which was kept at 14% for 5 years. So because of high rate of compensation and because of multiple slabs under GST, it has become difficult for the center to implement GST and hence also to compensate the states for the revenue loss. Since this GST issue has been raked up and has become very important in the economic discourse presently, it is a very important topic for the coming prelims and mains. So you have to understand the concept of GST thoroughly. You also must be able to write some flaws that you observe in GST and the recommendation for structural improvement in GST. So please add the notes of this article into the notes of DNS article that we did on 28th of August 2020. The authors go on to say that center must not give up its responsibility of compensating the states for their revenue loss, of the promise of making up for the shortfall in the 14% growth of GST revenue. The authors have given 4 reasons, and these reasons are very pertinent and very important. First of all, states do not have the access to multiple options that the center has for raising the fund, such as issuing the sovereign bond both in dollars and in rupee, or the option of taking loan against the PSU's shares from the Reserve Bank. States do not have this wide capacity of raising fund. Additionally, center can mobilize resource, can get funds at much lower rates because of higher trust that the center command compared to the states. Also, in terms of aggregate public sector borrowing, it will not matter whether the debt is with center or it is with the states. So when it comes to the debt market, when it comes to concept like crowding out, when it comes to the concept like money supply in the market, that will not change whether the borrowing has been done by the center or the state governments. It will also not change with regard to the rating agencies when they look at the aggregate public sector borrowing. The aggregate public sector borrowing includes both center and state. For rating agencies, the internal distribution of this public sector borrowing between center and state is not very significant. The authors also have pointed out that fighting the recession by increasing the fiscal stimulus is basically macroeconomic stabilization, which is the primary duty of center. So center must be taking greater financial burden in the pandemic rather than passing its responsibility to the states. The authors also have wondered what would Kautilya would have suggested in the present context, and authors are convinced that Kautilya too would have advised the sovereign against going back on the promised bailout to the states. But then there is no way of verifying that Kautilya would have suggested this. The authors have given 2 suggestions to bring in the structural reform in GST so that it fulfills the twin purpose with which it was enacted. Number 1, it helps us to meet the financial need of future, and number 2, it strengthens the cooperative federalism idea. The first suggestion from the author is that there has to be low to moderate uniform tax rate, and the multiple slabs under GST should be done away with. There should be very few exceptions under GST, and most of the goods and services should be brought under the net of GST. That will increase the base, and that itself will increase the buoyancy of tax. And that ultimately will help us to implement the original recommendation of having one uniform GST rate of 12%. The authors are suggesting that this should be done for at least coming 5 years. The author has given the example of Australia. Australia's GST rate has been constant at 10%. So learning from Australia and other nations who have kept one single unified rate throughout the nation, The authors are suggesting that we should keep it as 12%. Uniform rate will help in implementation. There will be less tax-related litigation, and ultimately that will help in increasing the tax buoyancy. The second suggestion is to include the third tier of government in GST administration. Even after 28 years of 73rd and 74th Amendment, the local government have not got their promised transfer of funds. In the recent time, because of many initiatives of Government of India like Smart Cities, Urban Mission, the responsibility of local government to provide government services to people have increased a lot. But ability to mobilize resources to provide those services has not increased proportionally. So the authors are suggesting in the 12% GST rate that they have suggested already, 10% must be equally shared between states and the center, and 2% must be earmarked exclusively for the local bodies. And the actual distribution of this 2% among panchayat, districts and cities can be done by the respective state finance commission. The reason why authors are suggesting this is because GST, as we all know, is destination-based consumption tax. And GST paid by every citizen establishes a tight link between governed and the government. As the quality of governance will improve, the tax compliance will also improve. And for the quality of governance to improve, the local bodies must be empowered, they must get the funds, function and functionary, and for that purpose, they must be brought within the ambit of GST administration. Only then the future need of raising fund by increasing the tax buoyancy will be met, and also the concept of cooperative federalism can be strengthened in the real sense. Pranab Da has departed from us yesterday. Although UPSC does not ask questions on current or recently past politicians, but you have to be prepared, because in 2009 UPSC asked this question. Among the following President of India, who was the General Secretary of non-aligned movement for some period? And the answer was C. Gyani Zail Singh. So some of the legacies of Pranab Mukherjee as Finance Minister and also as President you must be aware of. Dr. Pranab Mukherjee served as the 13th President of India from 2012 until 2017. Prior to that, he was Union Finance Minister from 2009 to 2012. He also has served in other ministry like External Affairs Ministry. He also became Bharat Ratna awardee in 2019. He was awarded Padam Vibhushan back in 2008. He has been the member of both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, and interestingly he also has served on Board of Governors of World Bank. Some of his initiative as President of India has been given in the DNS notes. Please read it from there and solve the question given in the DNS quiz. Now I will ask you a few simple questions from the discussion that we had so far. This is Pangong Lake. It's a transnational lake. 1/3 of it is in India and 2/3 in China. The question is, since Pangong Lake receives water from nearby glaciers, it's a freshwater lake. True or false? The statement is false because although Pangong Lake receives water from the nearby glacier, but it's a landlocked lake. And since there is no way out for the water, it turns saline. But it is not as saline as the seawater, but it is not fresh water either. So actually it's a brackish water lake. Pangong Lake is non-navigable. Pangong Lake is non-navigable. This is also an incorrect statement because we have seen during the course of discussion that the threat is, in the eventuality of war, China can enter into Indian territory very easily through the Pangong Lake. This is the rough sketch showing important areas along India-China border. India-China border actually is this. But this area of Askai Chin has been occupied illegally by China, and the area that India and China are controlling, that is along this line that has been shown. And there are some important points along this line. You have to tell me that which point shown on the map represent Galwan Valley. There are 7 points A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So out of these 7 points, which point is representing Galwan Valley? You may have little bit of confusion between point B and point G. But you also have to find out that which of these points represent patrolling point 14, PP14. PP14 and Galwan Valley are in the same region. but PP14 is in the ridges above Galwan Valley, just towards the north of Galwan Valley. So this point G actually is PP14, and point B on the map in that case would be Galwan Valley. So Galwan Valley here would be represented by point B and PP14 by point G. After this, you will have no confusion at all. Which point is representing Deepsang Plain? That should be as easy as candy for you. This position in the map represented by point A is the representation of Galwan Valley. Siachen Glacier, there is around 70 km of distance between Galwan Valley and Siachen Glacier. Siachen Glacier has been represented by point E. Karakoram Pass, you would know, is towards the north of Siachen Glacier, and that is point F. Chushul Valley is here in the southern bank of Pangong Lake, and recently flag hosting has happened in Chushul Valley to de-escalate the tension in the southern bank of Pangong Lake. The hot spring region is here, which is represented by point C. Now I'll give you some simple statements and you have to tell me whether they are true or false. Try to formulate our answer in your mind before I give out the answer. GDP in India is estimated by NSO under the Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance. GDP indeed is estimated by National Statistical Organization, but that is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, not under the Ministry of Finance. So this statement is incorrect. COVID-19 pandemic has caused GDP contraction for the first time in last 25 years. This is a correct statement. In fact, GDP contraction has happened for the first time in last 41 years. Last time it happened in 1979-1980. And you have to remember, this is the fifth instance after independence that we had GDP contraction. In the first quarter of 2020-21, all sectors of economy has seen contraction. This is an incorrect statement, all but one. And the sector that has not seen contraction is agriculture. Recession is defined as a fall in the overall economic activity for 2 consecutive quarters. That means for 6 months. This is a correct statement and this is the basic definition of recession. The household sector is one of the dominant sources of investment in India. Of course, it's a true statement. We have seen earlier during the discussion that the household sector used to contribute around 16% in 2011-12, but this has come down to 10.5% in 2017-18. So traditionally, household sector has been the dominant and it is still dominant, but now it has been exceeded marginally by private sector investment. Household sector investment has decreased because household sector invests by taking loan. And after 2014, when it was exposed that banks were running too high NPAs, lending from the bank decreased and hence household sector investment also decreased. But the statement in general that the household sector is one of the dominant sources of investment in India will obviously be true. Before the commencement of GST, many states were having tax revenue growth rate much higher than 14%, which is assumed in the GST regime. Oh no, this is an incorrect statement. In fact, during the course of discussion, we have seen that the promised reimbursement to fill the gap of an assured 14% year-on-year tax growth was a generous fault of central government. Such high year-on-year growth of taxes have not been observed in last 5 years by any major states or the center. Before GST, value-added tax reform already has seen harmonization of rates across the nation, and it also had inbuilt reimbursement formula just like GST. It is a factual and correct statement, but the thing is that the reimbursement formula was tapered over the years, meaning the reimbursement was decreased to make it sustainable for the center. And this has not been done in case of GST, and that is why, according to the article that we have discussed, center is facing problem in reimbursing the GST revenue gap of the states. State Finance Commission distribute the GST component of local bodies to different governance system in the state. Actually, no. Local bodies does not come under the ambit of GST. We have seen that the authors were suggesting that if we keep a uniform rate of GST at 12%, then 10% can be distributed equally between the states and the center, and 2% can be kept for local bodies. This is a suggestion, but presently local bodies do not come under the ambit of GST regime. So the statement is incorrect. There's a lead article in today's newspaper on Environmental Performance Index. The statement for you is, the Environmental Performance Index has been developed by UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme. True or false? The Environmental Performance Index actually has been developed by the two US universities, Yale University and Columbia University, in collaboration with World Economic Forum and European Commission. So it has not been developed by UNEP. Then this last statement for you, India has improved its ranking in the Environment Performance Index in 2020 compared to 2018. True or false? This is a true statement because in 2018, India had ranking of 117 and in the 2020 index, we have our ranking at 168. So that's an improvement. So the statement is true. Now we will see question for the day, but before that, answer to yesterday's question is D. All of the above. The question was, which of the following have a GI tag? Kashmir saffron, Telia rumal, Gorakhpur terracotta. It's a factual question and the answer is option D. Today's question is this. Consider the following statements. Present economic recession in India has happened only after 2008. Statement 2 is, economic recession in India is declared by RBI under the provision of RBI Act 1934. Select the correct option. 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the session. Thank you for hearing me out and I wish you have learned something from this session.